Good evening and welcome to How We See It, the show that focuses on issues of interest to the African American community and the greater community as well. Our show this evening identifies broadcast pioneers, and our first is Charles Edward Haines, artist, mediator, father confessor.
I got a call one night, and a Bloomington citizen had a meeting with me and said, well, since you're going to graduate school, why don't you do it here? And I said, well, I'll probably have to go and work a while, and then I'll go to graduate school. And he said, stay here, and we'll see if we can't work something out. And so I got to know that fella and his wife. They invited me into their homes many a time. But they admonished me to stay there and work with the community and continue to go to school. And they would find some way that I could find something around Bloomington to do. About that time, people were talking about something called television. Radio was the name of the game. And Sarkis Tarjian had the electronics industry in Bloomington. And he bought up all the radio stations one at a time until finally he had the only one left, WTTS. And so this gentleman who asked me to stay and some other people got together and they said, well, we got to get in on the ground floor television. Sarkis had been an engineer for RCA during the war. He was an Armenian fella. And there were other Armenian men who made up his corporation, and they were doing research and development and all kind of electronic things and so on. So Sarkis was not a great believer in television. He said it won't last, it won't last. And so this gentleman, I'll tell you his name, Bob Lemon, he said, no, Sarkis said you ought to invest some money and we'll put together this TV station. We can do it. So Sarkis says, okay, go ahead. There were about 18 young people, plus Bob Lemon. We had Sue Sherman, Bob Petranoff, a number of other people. And so we put together our little TV station in the same building where Sarkis had this radio station. And that was the beginning of Channel 4. We went on the air. And this will just blow your mind. We had all three networks. We had the Blue Network, we had NBC, we had the Dumont, and I don't know whether you even know what that is, but those were the networks in those days. And we had all three. And we had no idea what we were going to program. So they said, well, Bloomington High School basketball, square dancing. And we just went around and just started finding things to make up programs out of. And we started the TV station, didn't have a studio. We had small rooms where we had control rooms. And so then Sarkis later put up a separate building for the TV station and separated it from radio. And then we had a studio. But as our programming grew, we drew on all kinds of things, heavily oriented in local television, black and white, of course. And then we discovered that the university theater department and music department could provide a lot of material. And so that's where Dave Smith and some of the other people came in. They were all thespians in the theater department, you see. So they came over and did their Shakespeare plays, and the music schools sent us ensembles and so on. And so we had a lot of stuff that we could draw on the university for. Remember now, there was no communication department or anything like that in the university. That was just not done. And so we put up our studio, and Charlie was there, always available when we needed sets, and we'd get large sheets of brown wrapping paper, and we'd coat the walls with paper, and I'd get my buckets and brush and paint seams on the wall. And that afternoon, we'd tear the paper off and paint another one up there. So then some of the shows began to catch on. For example, like our old program called the Hayloft Frolic, which was a country music thing. And I never knew that it would ever become what country music is today. But we used to have the Hayloft Frolic, and I built a miniature barn. And we sat it on a table, and we fixed it like, in the old days, we call it a gobo, where the camera could come and put its nose right through the door, and then the walls were all painted on paper, and we had some bales of hay, and they had square dancers, and they had country singers, and so on. And so then pretty soon people began to say, oh, we want to come down and visit the Hayloft Frolic. And when they'd come to the TV station and find out that the barn was a little model, and that the inside of the barn was painted on paper on the walls, it didn't deter them. They just loved it. And so word got around, we have an artist who does all this kind of thing, And we just went from there, and we played it by ear. We made mistakes, and it was live television, and things went wrong on the air. The anchor guy giving the news, and the couch would burst, and the springs would come out, but nobody cared. I mean, it was just fun, because you did everything you wanted to, and you didn't have to answer to news directors. You didn't have to answer to program directors and all that sort of thing, such as you do today, because everybody did everything. I'd paint the scenery, and then I'd go in there and run the boom. You had to have the boom on this long pole, and I'd do that. The girl who was a copywriter, she might have to put on a costume and do a commercial, but we just had fun doing multiple jobs. We wore many hats, and we bonded very well. Our staff of 18 people, we went to lunch together, and I think during those years, which added up to 10, maybe I can confess, I forgot about being something called black. I was the only one there, you see, and anything we did, I was automatically a part of it. Now, I think most of the people I worked with, I think they kind of forgot it too sometimes, because little things would crop up every now and then where they were kind of tested on it, and they were reminded who they were and who I was, or something like that. But, so many stories now come out of that 10-year span of time. People would come to the station and visit. And what I did was all behind the scenes, but someone would come in and they would assume I was the janitor. And they would come and ask me to do such and such. And I'd say, oh, well, I'll find a custodian to do that. But just because they walked in and saw me, and they figured, well, he's a black guy, he's got to be a janitor, you see. And so it is during those 10 years that somehow word got out through some hook or crook, and Ebony Magazine sent us a word that they wanted to come and check this out because they heard that they had a minority, and they wanted to come and see for themselves if it was really true. And I think there was another black guy working for a station in Chicago doing something. But I was given to understand that there were no other black people in the entire country working in television.
While you were at 4, being the only African American, did your notoriety in the black community increase? Or, some people say they were ostracized for being the only one. Some say they were embraced. What was your experience?
My participation, yes, was received negatively by people on both sides of the racial line. There were people who criticized me because they said, well, you're doing things that you ought not to be doing, and that it's not going to pay off. And then on the other hand, there were people who were encouraging me, move on, go on and do these things, you see. And so yes, that happened. Because I used to go around preaching to all the students that I knew, you're here at the university to learn, and you're not here to reinforce your stereotypes and your biases. You're here to open doors. And I said, I'm going to keep walking through doors, and if they don't want me, they can throw me out, but I will walk through the door, And I have said something that a lot of people probably may not agree with my saying it, but several times I have said, and this is predicated on my not being fond of revisionism, but as we have revised history, we have overlooked some important things that went on. We always point to the sit-ins at the lunch counter in Carolina and some other places. But see, when you really research and look at situations, we had our own civil rights revolution in Bloomington there, which didn't make the papers because we were in a university in a small town in southern Indiana. Who cares? But things were going on there. Now, not alone myself. I mean, while I had a very special arena in which to perform, still we desegregated the skating rinks and the theaters, and they opened the restaurants. Finally, the football players, the coach went to the barber shop and said, cut the football players' hair. And the barber said, we don't know how to cut those people's hair. And so they said, well, go learn. A part of what I do now is what you might call just my presence. There's a lot of tension and a lot of problems that come with all of the new technology. And it's kind of nice for me to be there to tell my kids, okay, you're getting bent out of joint, go get a Coke, or let's go to lunch today. And I can see, like, we had a period of time when we were having a lot of things we were doing and everybody was at everybody's throats, and someone has to be the one to step in and say, you're getting uptight, you know, don't let it get you down. They're driving you hard, but now tonight I want you to go home, forget about all of this. Tomorrow's another day, the sun's going to rise, and you want to be there to be able to continue. So there's a lot of little things I do that are skills that go way back to the days of the war, when you had to sit in front of someone and look them in the face and say, don't try to be macho. You know, don't try to go out there and do something that you don't know whether you're capable of doing or not. And many people lost their lives, you know, by doing things that were really more than what they were capable of doing. When I left France and left the Pacific, keep in mind that I came back when other guys who left with me did not come back. And you have to realize that anybody who goes through the experience of war, you all ask that question sooner or later. Why them and not me? And when you do that, you have to address it some way. And so I came away feeling that, well, it's the old thing of, if I'm still here, there must have been a reason why I was left here. And so I have pursued these years since the war as a kind of expression of gratitude. And so I try to use my time wisely. And one of the best ways to do that is that I said, well, I will strive always to be a good person, and to let other people see being a good person is going to cost you, but it's worth it to try to be good.
What a charming man. And to think he's celebrating his 53rd year in broadcast television alone. Ebony magazine recognized Mr. Haines as the second African American employed in broadcast television. He really recalls the things that he did that helped to shape the careers of others. One person who felt that Mr. Haines had shaped his broadcast experience is Dave Smith, former colleague. He's a Ball State professor emeritus. He's also a retired program director for WISH-TV in Indianapolis. Dave, would you tell us the year you started in television and where?
I joined WTTV in Bloomington, Indiana in 1951 while I was a student at Indiana University. Started there part-time, of course. This was 2 years after they signed on. They signed on the air in 1949.
Okay. What kinds of jobs did you have in those early years?
Well, my first job was not with the television station. I was originally hired to be a disc jockey on the radio station. So I did a little radio work, and then one day the program director of the TV station came over and said, Dave, how would you like to work on television on Sundays? I said, fine. So I went over to a television station, which was in the same building, and announced on Sundays, which was great because, you know, in television you could watch TV for 30 minutes and talk for 30 seconds. That's all you had to do. Radio, you had to spin records and thread up tape, and you were working all the time. So TV was easy.
So you started out as an announcer?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Have most of your jobs in broadcasting been performance related or other?
No, not really. Once I got over in the television station, I started, of course, you know, in those days it was a small station, you did everything. So I ran camera, I edited film, and then eventually I started directing, which I enjoyed. And I became a producer-director. And that was the position I held when I left WTTV to go to WISH TV.
What was the ethnic and gender makeup of the employees at the TV stations, both at 4 and at 8, during those early years?
Well, at WTTV, which incidentally, when I worked there, it was Channel 10, and then it switched to Channel 4 after the freeze was lifted, and they did some reallocating, you know. Channel 10 went to Terre Haute, came WTHI, and then WTTV got 4. But anyway, to the best of my recollection, the only black we had at WTTV was Chuck Haines. And Chuck was there when I joined in 1951. He had already graduated from Indiana University. He was the artist. There was no one else but Chuck. And he was, I don't know what it is about artists, but he's kind of like, you know, the father confessor, because everybody would go up and talk to Chuck, because he was so easy to talk to and very easygoing guy and excellent artist. Just, it was fun just to watch him draw, you know, too. So spent a very pleasant time talking with Chuck. Now, as far as females, we did have an assistant program director who almost functioned as the program director of WTTV, Sue Bartlett. And Sue was, she and the program director, was Bob Petranoff, had the same office. They were together. They had 2 desks in the same office. And Sue did a lot of things too, as everyone does at a small station. She wrote copy, but she was pretty actively involved in programming as well. She was probably the most influential female at the station, as I recall.
Okay. At what point did Channel 8 start to add African Americans? Did they come in with the first crew of employees, or were they there when you got there in 51, or?
No, when I got to WISH TV in 51, I can't recall any. Or 55 is when I got to WISH TV. I can't recall any African Americans on the staff at all. Now, and I think this would hold true until the late 60s or early 70s, when the first person that I recall was in a position of any significance was Dwight Smith, who came in as a reporter and then became a weekend anchor for us. He wasn't there very long. He was there maybe 3 years, I'm guessing. I'm not sure. And then he was hired away by a Baltimore TV station, a much larger market. Left us. But after Dwight, I recall Jackie Burton coming as a reporter, and she was with us, I don't know whether she was with us 5 years, maybe 4 or 5 years, and to the best of my recollection, she left when she got a very nice offer from Eli Lilly and Company here in Indianapolis, and I believe she's finished her career there. If she's finished it by now, I don't know.
Were there any behind-the-scenes people like Charles had been at Wish?
We had two custodians, and one in particular, Ed Lee, we like to say practically ran the station, because he went around with an air of authority, and he was a very intelligent guy. He was a former boxer. He was a well-built guy, an older guy, but you could tell he had been a great specimen at one time. And but whenever he wanted anything done, called Ed Lee. Ed Lee would get it done. He'd fix it or whatever needed to be done.
Did you have an occasion to hire or recommend any African Americans or people of other ethnic groups who would have been breaking color lines?
Yes, and our general manager called me and said, Dave, I really would like to have a female host for this morning show, if you can find one. So I started looking, and it so happened that my brother, who was our production manager at the time at Channel 8, went to Chicago to look at WGN, I think it was WGN's, yes, news set, because we were thinking about building a new news set, and we thought we might steal some ideas. And he came back from Chicago and said, Dave, there's this great-looking black girl on WGN doing the weekend weather. She's very articulate, and she seems to be very intelligent, and boy, I bet she might be somebody who could host that morning show. I said, what's her name? It's Janet Langhart. And so I said, well, okay, I'll try to get in touch with her. And I called WGN. Of course, they wouldn't give out her phone number, and it took me, gosh, a week or more to finally track her down. And when I did get a hold of her, I said, Janet, this is Dave Smith. I'm program manager of Channel 8 in Indianapolis. We're auditioning for a morning show hostess, and I'd like for you to come in and talk to us about it. She said, Indianapolis? Are you kidding? I said, no, why? She said, that's my hometown. I said, it is? Yes, I graduated from Crispus Attucks High School. I said, no kidding. She said, yes, the only reason I left Indianapolis is because I wanted to be a model, and Ellis, Ayers, and Blocks would not take any black models, so I just had to go to Chicago to be a model. And then while I was modeling, I got this part-time job doing the weather at WGN. So I said, well, okay, come on down. Of course, we auditioned her, and she was terrific, terrific. And so I hired her right away and got a producer for her, Marty McPherson, to work with her and help put the show together. And we did reduce the show from 1 hour, which was Wally's, it was too long anyway, to 30 minutes. And and we called it Indie Today, and Janet hosted it, and she was a real force in the community. She won a Casper Award, which is one of the highest awards you can get for community service, and she did her homework, read up on everybody she was going to interview, and when she interviewed an author, she would actually read the book, you know, and she was just too good to be true, and I knew, as I told our general manager, so we're not going to keep her very long. She's going to be gone. And sure enough, she left and went to Boston, which was a pretty big market, and had her own show there in Boston, Massachusetts, and then went on to do a number of other things, including some network stuff, and got on the West Coast and did some things on the West Coast, and then, of course, eventually wound up marrying Secretary of Defense, William Cohen.
Hard luck story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Then after Janet left, we said we got to get a replacement for her. And so again, we were auditioning, and I knew Alpha Blackburn because she was pretty prominent in Indianapolis with she and her husband Walter, and so we had Alpha come in, and and auditioned her, and I can't even remember who else we auditioned, but Alpha wanted it real bad. She was, she kept calling me back and saying, "I can really do this show. I'm Mr. Smith. I'm sure I can do this show." So we hired Alpha, and she did. She did a very good job. And I don't know offhand how many years she stayed on doing that show, but whenever it was that she left, we had another black girl, Hallie Crumbaugh. Hallie came in and did the Indie Today show for a while, and then Hallie became our Director of Community Affairs at Channel 8. Shortly before I left, I think she got that title.
That Dave, what a guy. You might want to check his website for blacks and others in film. Now there's that affable, attractive, and animated Barbara Boyd, the first African-American female reporter in Indianapolis broadcasting.
I got in the business by accident. You've heard of being at the right place at the right time. Well, that's what happened with me. Now, I initially worked for Head Start, helping to open the Head Start office in 1965, July 10th, I believe, 1965. Well, Channel 6, which then was the NBC affiliate, is now the ABC affiliate, was doing a documentary on Indianapolis. And within the documentary, they included the Head Start program. So several weeks down the line, somebody got the idea, we need a little color on TV. So they wanted to interview the teacher in the classroom where they had filmed, and you notice I'm saying filmed, that's how long ago it was. And so when the call came through for her, I got the call. So, of course, before putting calls through to the classroom, you sort of screened them. I was a Head Start's office manager at the time. So I asked, what was the nature of the call, and he told me that they wanted to do an audition with the teacher. And I said, well, honey, if you're looking for a star, here I am, joking. So he said, would you be interested in doing something? I said, yeah, what I got to do, So he said, well, just work up a little 5 or 6 minute vignette on anything you'd like. So since I was office manager, I did it on the office workers. Didn't know it, did a little standing, walk up, stand up, a little walking stand up, went from desk to desk. And just, they sent out a crew, and did the whole bit, and then did a stand up close. And then I had to go down to the studio and do a newscast. And I guess about 8 black women tried out, including the lady they initially contacted. And so when one day my husband and I driving by the station, I again jokingly said, I'll probably be working there one day. He said, yeah, right. So sure enough, when February 10th, 1969 rolled around, old Barbu was sitting up at Channel 6 News. Of course, they didn't know what they were going to do with me. I started out in programming. And then they said, then I had 2 weeks in programming, 2 weeks in news. So they asked me, where would you like to be? And since Jim Gerard was the head honcho on the programming, which was the noon show, and he was doing what I would have wanted to do, so I said, I'll take news. Didn't know beans. But through the help of a lot of great guys, and I think I was the only female there for about 4 years, but they were great. And I didn't know how to write a script. I didn't know anything about producing a piece. But guys like Jim Hetherington and Alan Jeffries and my news director, Bob Gamble, and the photographers. Honey, life is dead without a photographer. They really carry you through. They did me. And with the help of those people, I got through it. But I tell you what was so interesting, my husband and I really sat down and talked about it before I took the job, because what it meant, too, is that there would be times that I would be out of town with a man, maybe for several days. What would the wives think? How would community take it? There were all those, there were our children here at home. That meant the, roles sort of had to shift. met my husband, had to do some extra things, and could we work that out? And had it not been for Ted and him saying, you know, go for it, honey, you know, I don't think I would have been as, you know, as comfortable doing, you know, taking the job. And, you know, and I was old when I started. I was 40, and that's old to start in television. And to, and we had young children. And for him to be, you know, to jump in like that for me and to support me like that, it's just the coolest. And, you know, when I go out to give speeches to women's groups, and one of the things I always say, whether you're going into television or going into any other kind of business, but I'm most especially television, where you do just spend long hours, you know, away from home or on your job, you know, there really has to be an understanding that, you know, what the business is like. And, you know, I'm not staying away from home because I want to stay away from home. I'm not going out of town with this guy because he's the one I want to be out of town with. It's just part of the business, and they have to understand that. And I was very fortunate in that Ted understood that.
Now,
when I first started the station, there wasn't, well, I didn't notice whether there was any animosity or, you know, reticence on the part of anybody to accept me. It's just that they didn't know whether I was an intern or whether it was a temporary thing, you know, what was I really going to do there? And when I finally made the decision to go to news, I got to say there was a lot of help from, you know, photographers, from my news director. Matter of fact, after several weeks, I said, gosh, there's got to be more to this job than this, you know. It just didn't seem very difficult to me. So I went into my news director, Bob Gamble, and I said, you know, am I doing everything right? I mean, there's got to be more to it than this. And then he said, bring your scripts in and your film, and we'll go over them. And he was looking, he said, now on this particular story, you could have used a little B-roll. I said, B-roll? What's that? It was just a little something, I mean, you know, A goes, you know, the video goes with the audio. The picture goes with the words. And so when we got into that, I said, oh, that's cool. And he said, well, maybe. And, you know, initially when you start in business, it wasn't so much the emphasis was on the reporter like it is now. Now they want reporters to be identified. Then it was voiceover to sound, voiceover to the picture. And so then it came a time when they wanted the reporters to be identified. Why don't you do a little stand up here, or a bridge, or a close? One of the two, or, you know, one or two or the other. And so, you know, from that point on, there wasn't a problem. I did have a problem writing. I write long. I used to write long. I had a difficult time compressing my writing, you know. Matter of fact, Alan Jeffries told me when I first started, he says, first thing you want to do is get your clothes off. Right, okay. What happened? Get right to the meat of the story. And I had a little problem with that. I don't think I ever had a problem anywhere that I went because I was black. I mean, I didn't notice it, but then, you know, I don't look for those kind of things. So, and nobody's ever turned me down for a story. I don't know many people that don't want to be on television. And I got to say, I really didn't have much of a problem until I came to the realization that I wanted to anchor. And I'd always been sort of satisfied. And so Max Robinson, you remember Max Robinson used to be on ABC network, was through town, and I interviewed him. And so he says, well, how are things going here? And I said, well, you know, I've been here, I think at that time, 10 years, and I said, I'm still a reporter. And he said, that's your fault. I said, how so? He says, you have to let people know what you want. You can't assume that because you've been filling in as an anchor, filling in here on vacations, that they're automatically going to give you the job when the next opening comes about. You have to let people know what you want. And he was absolutely right. And that situation arose. And they put somebody else in the anchor spot where I had been filling in during summers and weekends and, you know, vacations and whatever. And I simply asked the question, why wasn't I considered for the anchor job? And they told me, well, you already have a spot on the noon show, because I produced a 5-minute segment on the noon show every day. I said, well, no, you're not understanding me. I want to know why I wasn't considered for the anchor position. And the answer was, well, 2 women at noon? And my retort was, 4 white males at 6? Get a life. So we had a little back and forth thing about that. And I finally became anchor of the noon show, and I anchored that show for 4 or 5 years, I don't remember, whatever. And then, of course, new management comes along, and out you go. And, of course, that time, what was I told? I wasn't ready. That's what it was. I wasn't ready. And that was very devastating to me. Matter of fact, I think that was the reason I had a very serious illness after that. I was just crushed. But, you know, the management at that time, the new management at that time, called me and asked me, you know, why did I appear to be sad? I told them, I said, don't you worry about it. I'll get over it. You know, and I'll probably be here longer than you. But, you know, let me grieve in my own way. You know, my audience is not going to suffer because I don't feel well. Because, that, you know what? Nobody ever cares about your problem. I mean, everybody's busy doing their own stuff. And there's no need, and you sitting around, you know, because it doesn't work. You got to do your own thing and get your own self together. And I did that.
Was there much community response when you were taken off the anchor desk?
Yeah. Matter of fact, people wanted to picket. This girl called me and wanted to picket, and I said, no, we're not going to do that. There was petitions, you know, certain organizations went to him, but he wouldn't budge, you know. Pardon me. But he wouldn't budge. And, you know, and I know what the business is like. I know he wanted to bring in his own people. New management has a right to do that. But that didn't, they say don't take it personally. I did. And I think it's difficult for anybody not to, especially when you've been told that you're doing a good job. You know, I mean, there was never an evaluation to say, you know, you're not doing well. Nobody ever said that. But you know, that's one of the things about television. Nobody ever tells you until it's too late. You know what I mean? Nobody tells you, you know, you're wearing the wrong shade of lipstick, or your hair's not right, or you're pronouncing words incorrectly. You know, if one of your friends doesn't tell you, or maybe once in a while they'll send in a consultant from New York that knows beans about your community and, you know, wants to apply New York standards to local standards. We tried that with one station here. It didn't work. Had the guy sitting on the desk, and, you know, it just didn't work. I mean, you have to find your own niche in your own community. And I think I had great rapport with people in this community. I think they accepted me beautifully. And we had fun. And I think what they could see in Barbara is that Barbara was for real. What you saw, what is. You know, whether you saw me on the air, you saw me in the street. You know, and I enjoyed what I did. I had fun at what I did. And I think that showed. I mean, I just don't think you can lie in front of TV, you know, and it doesn't come through. So I think, you know, part of being in this business, and one of the things that helped make me successful, if I was successful, and I think it was, is, you know, being true to the craft and having fun and enjoying what you do.
If you had to write your own epitaph, I know something everybody looks forward to, what would you want to have displayed?
Well, I think I'll just have put on there. what I used to say when I used to end my noon show. Have a great day and stay on top of the world.
Thank you.
Okay.
Leroy Seats, first African American E&G coordinator in the state of Indiana. Mr. Seats was a drummer with a gospel band. He found himself to be pretty temperamental as he tried to cross the color line. But through the help of some of the people we've already met, the temperamental drummer learned to play music to a different beat.
During the summer of '71, I was interviewed for a job as a film editor, back when film was still available. And it was just for a summer relief, and I figured that would be a good way to get my feet wet, to find out if that's really what I wanted to do, be a drummer or work in television. So I took this job as a film technician back in '71, and I enjoyed it. I was just supposed to be here for the summer, and my intent was to go on to college to get a degree in engineering. And while I was working this part-time job as a film technician, I filled out an application to be in the engineering department, because that's really the things I saw the engineers doing was exactly what I would choose to do in life if I had to give up being a drummer. My chief engineer at the time told me that he would love for me to take a course in engineering from Cleveland School of Electronics, which I did. I took a correspondence course because I also worked at a barbecue place here in town called Zeb's Barbecue at 38th and Keystone, which I'm also a cook. So I had a hard decision on what I wanted to do, be a drummer, be a head chef at Zeb's Barbecue, or work in television. But I took this engineering course, and my chief engineer was 100% behind me at the time, because affirmative action had just started, and the department engineering only had one African American, and he just happened to be my half-brother, as a matter of fact. My half-brother was also in the church choir, the same church that I belonged to, and so every weekend the choir went out of town, and he loved singing in the church choir as much as I loved being the drummer for the choirs. And one day our boss found out that we were half-brothers, and that we both belonged to the same church, and that we needed our weekends off, and we couldn't seem to get the weekends off, even though we had seniority, had worked up our seniorities in the business. So my brother came in one day and picked up his paycheck and decided that that day was his last day as a TV technician, and he turned in his resignation. And as soon as he turned in his resignation, because of affirmative action, they had to hire another minority. And at the time, I was already in the same building working in the film department, and they came in and asked me if I would like a shot at being a technician. And I basically knew how to do it already, because I used to go to work on the weekends with my brother, and I used to stand over his shoulder and watch everything he did. So I took the course, Cleveland School of Electronics, and completed the class and decided this is what I wanted to do. So I went to the chief engineer and told him that I finished the class, and asked him if there was a chance that I might be considered as an engineer to replace my half-brother. And my chief engineer was from Birmingham, Alabama, and so he was raised up in the South, and he boldly, without hesitating, told me that black people were not smart enough to do the engineering type job. And so thank God I did complete this course with the Cleveland School of Electronics, and who would have thought 30 years later that I'd be an engineering supervisor at WTHR. I used to come to work every day wearing a suit because I was working in the film department and had just got transferred into engineering, and it seemed like every day I'd come to work thinking that I would be doing a certain job, that I would end up having to do maintenance, crawling around in the ceiling, getting all dirty because my boss just despised me coming to work with a suit on. He always told me there's no reason for you to come to work wearing a suit, and I basically told him, you know, whatever job that you give me to do will get done regardless of how I come dressed. And I could always tell he had a problem with me wearing a suit to work. And we went at it. He was hard on me, and he always picked at me. And he flat out told me, he says, we're going to hire you. We've checked your background, and you seem like a pretty eager worker. He told me, he says, even though you're black, as long as you do a good job and do what I tell you to do, we'll get along.
How do you think your experience with the engineer, your supervising engineer, shaped your own management style with the one who told you that he didn't think blacks were smart enough to become engineers?
And that's a great question, because now that I am a supervisor and have been since 1986, I believe it was, March 12th, right around my daughter's birthday, he shaped me and molded me. I was so mad at him for making that statement to me that my main goal was to prove him wrong, especially when I asked to be trained on the live microwave trucks, and he told me that blacks weren't smart enough to do that type job. I day and night studied to prove him wrong, and he made me a very strong person. I thought at the time that he was just picking at me just because I was black, and I really in my heart believed that he was picking at me, but I believe that he saw something in me that he wanted to bring out in me but didn't let me know it until he retired. After he retired and I became a supervisor, my main goal was to drive to his house, which was almost 50 miles away from here, pull up in his driveway driving a live unit, and not only tell him that not only am I smart enough, but I'm the supervisor now. So I pulled up in his driveway, I went up and knocked at his door. This was in Monrovia, Indiana, just on the other side of Plainfield. And his wife came to the door, and she saw a live truck from Channel 13 and a black man standing at the door, and she smiled at me and says, "You must be Leroy." And I told her, "Yes, I am Leroy." I says, how would you know who I am? She says, "All Mac talked about was you all the time. Leroy this, Leroy that. The young man comes to work wearing a suit. I put him on maintenance and made him get his suit dirty. The next day he came to work wearing another suit." So I said, excuse my French, I said, "So how is the old fart doing since he's retired?" And she somberly looked down and said, "He passed away last month." That hurt me to my heart, because I wanted to prove to him that black people could if we put our minds to it. But still to this day, as a supervisor in 2001, I know he's smiling down on me saying, "You know, I was born and raised to hate blacks, but there's one young man that I saw a lot in, and I knew what he could do, and I'm glad he made something of himself, and if I do nothing else right in my life, I want to give that back to the community." That's one of my main and major goals.
Wow.
You can walk around Channel 13 right now in any department, from sales to engineering to marketing, promotions, public affairs, the newsroom. There are over 50 African Americans on board at Channel 13 at this point right now, to this day. And I'm not trying to take the credit for it because of people like Charlie Haines, who have been here over 40 some odd years, but I'd like to think that I was part of the ones who paved the way because of wanting to learn more, having to work on attitude problems when I thought that I was just being picked on because I was black. I had major attitude problems towards certain people that I thought made me work nights and weekends for 17 years that nobody in history has ever had to do here at Channel 13. Most people get hired on here, and within a year or two, they've already got weekends off. But I think that there was a reason for this, and one scripture that always comes to my mind, and not by accident, came from my wife when my brother was in a real bad accident, and they weren't expecting for him to live. And one thing I pride myself in is Psalms 46:10 out of the Bible that says, "Be still and know that I am God." It's one of my favorite scriptures. We always go through things in our lives, and when things don't go right, we say, "Okay, God, I'm gonna ask you for your blessings and pray to God that you take care of this problem. But I'm gonna give you 10 minutes to take care of this, or either I'm gonna have to take things into my own hands." It was one of my biggest problems. And over the years, if you just call on him and just be still and wait your turn, it always works out all right. The Bible says he may not be there when you want him, but he's always right on time.
Radio personality, model, TV talk show host. Bea Moten-Foster entered Indiana broadcasting as a radio personality. She went on to host a talk show at WISH-TV in Indianapolis. We know the Queen Bee as a newspaper owner. I think you'll find in her story, Bea never found a job too big for her to achieve.
In Birmingham, Alabama, and I was first visiting my aunt, and I would listen to radio station WJLD. And one day, my first cousin called and said, I thought you told me you wrote this song, and I forgot the name of the song. I'm sorry. And I said, I did. She said, well, I just heard that song on WJLD. And I said, you couldn't have. And I called the radio station and talked to the DJ. His name was Lewis White. I'll never forget. And I said, did you just play a song by the name of? He said, no. The song was named, and he told me the name of the song he did play, in fact. He says, oh, you write music? I said, oh, yes, it's a hobby. He said, well, why don't you come over and talk to me? Perhaps you might be interested in doing some things for this station, because the lady who used to do one of our talk shows is leaving. Alma Johnson was her name, Colin Powell's wife. I said, okay. So what I did was to go to the station the very next day. He was flirting, really, and I didn't realize that. But I went to the station, and we had a lengthy talk. And he says, look, I can teach you how to do this talk show, a 1-hour talk show with the station. And he worked with me for several weeks, and I was able to take over the show on my own. But this show was a 1-hour luncheon show that was done by Alma Johnson. And I began to take over the show about 30 days after I met Lewis White. That's how I got started in radio. Didn't go to any university, because I don't think the universities were teaching, telecommunication at that particular time. So I got on-the-job training with the station.
How did you get from Miami to Indianapolis?
Oh my
What
gosh,
stops in
in between, I became the first, well, first of all, the radio station I was working for turned Spanish in 1 week. And we were told unless we could speak Spanish, that all of us were going to be dismissed from the station. This was when the first Cubans came into the Miami area. The masses of the Cubans came in. And many of my friends I had met in Miami told me if I was ever out of a job to come to New York. And I did go to New York, but I could not find a job in radio. The radio station managers were not interested at that time in talking to any female radio announcers. So every place that I called told me no, 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 no. So I decided that I would create my own radio program. So instead of asking for a job, I then called the stations and said, look, I have an idea for a radio program. And my idea was to do a radio program about Africa. And the reason I did it was because I met this African ambassador. And I listened to him talk about Africa, and I learned so many things. And I told him after his lecture, I said, I didn't realize this and this and this about Africa. He said, most Americans are not aware of New Africa. And my program was called African Profiles. And I did the show from the UN.
What was it that motivated you to make the move from radio into television?
Because after being with 2 stations there in Indianapolis, well, first of all, I became the first female to have, to be on TV, because I was co-host with a Caucasian man by the name of Sid Thompson on Channel 8. And the 2 of us had an early morning talk show. And from that to doing specials with Channel 8. And Dave Smith was then program manager at the station at that time. And Dave was able to do several things. And he pioneered the way for blacks to be on TV, because most of the television stations there in Indianapolis weren't hiring blacks. But okay, what made the transition from radio to TV? There was only one station there in Indianapolis that was black, and that was WTLC. And even moving from a black station into a Caucasian station was different. And from the Caucasian station, I said, well, look, I can broaden my horizons by going into TV, because I was told by several people, well, why aren't you in TV? So I've always been a bold person who was willing to try anything once. And I decided I would try TV. And that's when I left radio and then went into TV.
Okay, so you got the part-time on-air position at 8. What were those early years like in terms of race relations at the station?
Oh my gosh, that's another area that was critical. When I was at the radio station, the Caucasian station, they were always sharing black jokes with me, and it was supposed to be amusing. And I spent, I guess, the first 30 days telling them, please, don't do this. Keep your racial jokes to yourself, and let's just talk about other things. But someone always had a black joke to share with me. Even the janitor at the station, who was black, thought it's just fine, but it was not. It was insulting and degrading. And you often had to put people in their places in a nice, kind way, with a smile, but you still got your point across.
So did you find that same kind of atmosphere at the TV stations?
No, it was very rare. It didn't happen, when I was at Channel 8. As a matter of fact, Channel 8 did pioneer a lot of things for blacks in various areas of communication. Once you've been bitten by the television bug, it's there forever. So several years ago, here in Muncie, I became the first person to request and did receive public access time from Century TV, it was called at that particular time. And Ball State University worked with me, and we were able to launch a program called Around Muncie Today. And that show is still on the air. That I spent most of my life trying to make things better for African American people. That I was not afraid to tackle anything or any program or anyone.
I hope that tonight's show reveals information about the achievement of African Americans. I hope also that we learn that it's the understanding of community, of growing together, that creates history, not just during the month of February, but throughout the year. Have a pleasant evening.